This is deliveranceministry.fm VideoCast number 48. Hello again, everybody. Welcome to another episode of deliveranceministry.fm, where we give you proven insights about the demonic realm and deliverance ministry so that you can be more effective in waging spiritual warfare. This is Dr. Don Ibbotson here again with my co-host and colleague, Dr. Phyllis.
Hey,
good afternoon,
Dr.
Dr. Phil. Good to have you here as always. We very much enjoyed doing these. Welcome to episode 48.
Yeah.
And before we get into it too far, I want to encourage you to go back and listen to episode 47.
Yeah.
You need to do that first. If you haven't done that, please do that. Stop your play or whatever it is, because this is part 2 of a 2-part series. And in the first session, we introduced the notion and the concept of the demonic stronghold or spirit of Jezebel. We're titling this podcast, Understanding Jezebel, Demonic Principality. And in that first episode, we talked in general terms of the principality spirit of Jezebel, its influence on the earthly spirits, other things working in people, control, manipulation, is sort of a seducing spirit, and touched on it, how we see it working in people's lives and certainly in the church. So encourage you to really go back and listen to that, because as I say, it is kind of an overview. And where we left it last time and where we're going to go on from today is to just talk about the notion of Jezebel, or not the notion, rather the specifics of warnings or indicators, because hopefully as you listen to the first episode, you might be wondering, well, two things. Do I have a spirit of Jezebel? And or am I in a church that's under the control of that, and am I being attacked or being attacked by a spirit of Jezebel? So we're going to try to address those issues today. As we touched on the last time, we really see this spirit operating a lot in churches, and certainly you see it operating over families, but a lot of times you see it doing a lot of damage in churches. So I think that's an important place to start. And we're going to share with you some things we've learned on our own, but you might want to start by telling our experience last October, right? When we were out at, we went to a seminar, a seminar out in Dallas.
Well, actually, we were asked to speak at the International Seminar of Deliverance Ministers out in at the Gloria Zion in Corinth, Texas. And one of the speakers that was there was Jennifer LeClaire. And she's got a lot of good books out on Jezebel. So if you ever need to reference any of them, I think she's got like 2 or 3. One of the ones that is most recent is Jezebel's Puppets, and that exposes the agenda of a Jezebel spirit. So that's always good reference. But, she talks about it as a wicked spirit that roamed the earth for thousands of years, seeking someone to entice into sin. But Jezebel is more than a spirit of control and manipulation that many make it out to be. She's a spirit of seduction that works to woo people into immorality and idolatry. So, big agenda.
Well, it is. And that's what, like I say, just by way of brief review, we see Jezebel as kind of a second heaven spirit in the realm of principalities. It talks about in the book of Daniel that there are spirits that rule over territories.
Right.
And we see her up there, but influencing, and if you like, directing. We don't know the linkage. We're going to get down in the weeds too far, but influencing the spirits that attack people.
Right.
And so that's what we're going to focus, really hone in on today, is indicators that you might be, that might be a Jezebel spirit at work at large in your environment, right? So we want to give her Jennifer due on that, because she's got good books, and there's lots of resources out there. There's lots of, as we mentioned in the last time, there seems to be almost a fascination, but a real focus on the spirit of Jezebel. I mean, you can see articles, you can see videos, everybody's referencing the spirit of Jezebel. So it's, I think that's a legitimate topic, because it's doing a lot of damage in the church. Right. So.
Right.
Well, what are some indicators or warning signs that the person might be that there might be a Jezebel spirit at work?
Well, we always start off with control, because everybody recognizes control. I think that control is a big thing, and people tend to control out of fear. They really do. There's something generally in the past of someone that could be operating under this one's influence that's left it insecure, like it's childhood or maybe some trauma or oftentimes like sexual abuse you'll see, and these children, because they've had such an unstable upbringing, that control, it comes to be their safety net, so that they can control others, so that they'll identify fear in others and they'll go out to control them. Now, I remember I had a family members that came in. There was a husband and wife team, and this was the first time I actually recognized when I was praying against this thing. And I knew it was not in them, but it had unleashed a hook in them through their fear. And it was actually their daughter. Now, their daughter had been sent away. She was incarcerated. But both the husband and the wife, when I prayed for them and I called this spirit out, their hands moved like they were being puppeted, like being marionetted, right? Both of them, one after the other, exactly the same thing. And I knew that something was on the outside, an outside force that was spiritually trying to manipulate and control them. And, it came out that it was their daughter, and that spirit of manipulation had come in and hooked them and was using their fear of letting it down or being punished by their daughter. They were doing all sorts of things they should not have done, but she had gained, even while she was in jail, she was still controlling them. So it comes in with control. Based on,
so trying to control that spirit, you can see. So somebody's trying to control you because generally it's because of maybe some trauma or some fear issues in their life.
It's their self-protection device. It is.
So,
and they'll control others, and they'll find it. They'll find cowering. It'll find a cowering person to hook that spirit of control right into, so that basically you're underneath it, and that gives it power.
And that's why many times we'll see it going after the leadership, right? I mean,
sure.
If you're going to go after somebody, why not the leadership?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because it wants to hide. It wants their protection, right? I think the leaders are going to, and because it's always nice to the leaders, and whenever you talk to a leader about, there's some control or there's some manipulation or there could be some parts of a Jezebel spirit that seem to be operating through this person, then, the leader is always like blinded by it. They're like, no, that could never be, because it's always so kind to them. I mean, even in the workplace, you'll see that it'll come in from nowhere. It'll get right up next to your power of authority, and it'll start to influence others. I had that happen at my job. This girl came in, she positioned herself right towards the head of our department, and she was wonderful to the head of our department. So even the outcry from all of us in the field made no difference to this woman at all, because she was so under the deception of this spirit that was so convincing. And she came in, she fired everybody that had been at my job for like 28, even 30 years that she didn't hire, because we were threats. And the boss let her do it. So, it's same in ministry. It hides right up, and it boots the prophets out. It boots the people in the church out that come against it, because it's got the protection of the leader.
Tries to blind the leader. No, if you can imagine, if it's in the leadership, if that spirit's operating through one of the leaders in the church, then it's even worse.
Right.
It's bad, because, and sometimes you'll see where the leadership in one part of the leadership, it could be a husband and wife team, it could be whatever the leadership. If they're blinded to it, they don't see it.
No, they just don't see it. It's a good hider. But it'll always manifest in front of others. Like the rest of the people all can see it pretty clearly.
Everybody else can see it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right.
So another one is they always make commitments and promises very quickly. They want to impress you. Like, even as I mentioned, the one girl at work, she just came right in. Boy, she let me hear all of your heart. Let me know what it is that your desires are. What can I help you with? And then she made all these promises that she was going to do all these changes to our department. And boy, did she. Boy, then we were all gone.
Wow.
But all right up front.
So that's not just limited to church. I mean, these are non-church. These are secular business. So you see it in the world too. But sometimes we don't have the phrasing, the terminology for it. But those same devils can be working even through people, just in the secular, right, in the business environment. Right. And that's what you're sharing. So that's an important thing to see.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But also too, they do have their own agenda. So they typically want to come in. They will come in to gain control, to gain authority in a church atmosphere, or even like I just shared at my job. But they want the power, And so eventually what they're trying to do is get their own disciples. Like, at my job, she wanted all the people that she hired so they would be under her. But in a church, they kind of, they sow seeds of contention in the body to make them look like they're the better leader. So you're talking
about being super spiritual.
Yeah. And they want them to come under their leadership. So they're kind of gathering for their own selfish motivation in the midst of a church. They'll come in to gather you for their ministry.
And you'll hear them use, well, God told me. And I've done articles and blogs about, dealing with God told me people. I mean, God does tell people and speak things, but when you hear that a lot from people, and many times a little voice and say, well, that's not God. But when somebody says, well, God told me this, it's like, wow, now you have a choice to make. Was that God? Do you stand up and confront that? Because it's pretty hard to come against somebody when, well, God told me this. And sometimes you hear it saying, gosh, that doesn't sound like God to me. And you have to question it. So they will use those, well, God showed me this. God showed me that.
Yeah.
And it's like,
you're going to be part of my ministry team.
You're hearing from God, right? Just like that, And they'll use so once again, we've got other articles on that. God does speak, but when you hear that a lot out of people, God told me this, God told me that. It's like, I think the warning lights ought to go on in your spiritual dashboard.
They're trying to, they'll use that to build themselves up,
right? So
that they can, how are you going to, a lot of times you'll sit back and go, how do you argue with something if God's talking to them? But, you hear that, God said we were going to be doing this together, and God said that you were going to be one of my spiritual daughters. I mean, I have been in that position so many times as a young person. And, now I'm aware. When I start to hear stuff like that, I kind of take it with a grain of salt. Because you want to be careful.
Exactly.
But that's what they do. They also want to isolate and pit people against each other. Whether they do it individually or they do it privately behind closed doors. That's their idea is to come in and divide. And
so talk about somebody, get behind closed doors, talk about somebody else and this. So,
it's like, it's like that 3 is a crowd thing, one-on-one is good, but that third person that comes in, they're always trying to get the other person to be their best friend. A lot of this stuff starts in childhood like that. But as this gets older, it manifests in that dividing thing where it wants all these little followers to just be submissive to it. And it's really, it really does cause a lot of contention. And then, and it goes behind your back to, sow a lot of judgment about you or lies about you to other people. And then to your face, it's like doing the same thing to you about them. So you never can trust it. You can never trust it because it's always operating to put itself as the head of whatever it is. Even in ministries and friendships and churches, you'll see this. You'll see it. It operates through people. Yeah. And then of course they play a victim. They're victimized because they're never wrong. It always tends to be somebody else's fault, and they'll play on your compassion to mess with your discernment. I mean, really, if you've got a compassionate heart,
start feeling sorry for them.
Yeah,
yes.
You start having it. It's a spirit of self-pity that comes in to just wrap you in. And here's the thing that I found with the spirit. A lot of times when it does this, a lot of us can understand a spirit of this Jezebel spirit that's operating through someone. I want to be careful not to call a person a Jezebel spirit because that gets backlash. That's like crazy. But if you identify this, you can identify the controlling part of it. But, I had that down like pat for years, but I didn't get it when it came in with the indirect control. Because different temperaments will use different things. And this, I get I would like to ask you to be my mentor, but you probably won't because, you're too busy and you're probably mentoring and I'm not worthy enough. And you probably wouldn't want to spend the time with me because I'm too much work. And then, your heart's just like going out. And then you go out to kind of rescue this individual. And boy, I'll tell you what, they want more and more and more. And it can be that empty bucket that you can't fill that's going to drain the living daylights out of you, and you won't see it because you're not seeing it as overt control, but it's indirect and it's playing on your sense of compassion. So 2 sides to this one. Don't overlook that one because that one's just as deadly. Yeah. Then they'll use, false humility and feel like they're entitled, like you owe them something. And that can be a little daunting, because then you feel indebted to them. Like with, my situation that I talked about in episode 47, she felt like that particular person that wanted to always be my spiritual mother felt like I really owed her, and that there was no way I could pull away from her, because she was always going to be my spiritual mother, because she was the one that had helped me really get started when I woke up. So I was like indebted to her, like I really owed her my whole walk. Kind of scary. So, but
ungodly control. Yeah, just part of it ends up wanting to control that person. It's just have them build disciples, be the center of attention, and it can be very innocuous. It's not always the loud and brash person that's doing that. So,
but they tend not to be really accountable to anybody. I mean, they do try to position themselves where they're up there in leadership or running their own little part of it. They don't. And even if
I need to do what God tells me to do. I need to do what the Lord tells me.
Right. And you'll see it too, though, in church leaders, where the head pastors will come in and say, I don't know how to handle this person that's head of, the women's ministry, because she's not letting me have any part of it. And she doesn't want to be accountable for anything that she's rolling out in the ministry piece. You'll see them just come right in and take over like that. And then, then a lot of times they'll accuse others that they're the Jezebel, that there is a Jezebel. I think that's something probably for yet another blog, but
yes. That's probably a whole session on itself.
Yeah, because you never want to call anybody a Jezebel spirit. If you look at somebody and you call them a Jezebel spirit, the backlash on that is tremendous, and I've done that. I've noticed some control in people, and I turned right around. Oh, they're just, they're a Jezebel. They're what? And boy, I tell you what, I got hit with it and ended up being accused of one myself, because the door was open. So you got to be really careful with that. As you judge, you will be judged. Like we talked about, we once again, without going back too far, but we think people, we don't call Jezebel spirits out of somebody. We just say there's spirits that are over them, that are over the church or the environment or whatever. There's other tormenting spirits. It could be control, it could be manipulation, it could be these other things, seducing spirits. But so that's I think that's an interesting thing, that they will many times lash out and call and accuse somebody else of being controlling. Oh, yeah.
That's what you call the pot calling the kettle black.
Yeah.
But they're not going to receive that.
No, but they do accuse. Yeah. And they'll wrap it up in a lot of, and they'll wrap it up in some truth, So like when they go out to accuse you of something, they'll hit on some points that are valid, but then they mix the humanism in there, and it confuses you, because you got to recognize that there's a spirit of witchcraft that's really behind a lot of this. And when you're in its presence, because I've had this happen, I had someone have a special assignment to come and share with me a word, and I thought, oh, this is good, this is going to be a great word. And I'm halfway through the lunch, and they've told me things that they see, and I thought, yeah, no, this is good, and now I recognize that's something I need to work on, and I was really being humble. And then they start slamming you with all the stuff that they see, and you recognize you're just getting hit with it. And I always feel, it does always feel like my blood pressure is just going to go right through the roof, because I can't figure it out oftentimes while I'm under it. And now when I walked away from that lunch, I sat there and I went, oh my gosh, that was the spirit of witchcraft. Because what it does is it releases a spirit of stupor over you that you can't think straight while you're in its presence. And that's very typical of a Jezebel ruling spirit. It kind of like, it dumbs you down, where you don't even know how to respond, because it tends to overwhelm you with a lot of that stuff. I remember when I first saw it, the Lord showed me it looked like half of its face was white and half of its face was black, like a mask. And when I was listening to this person talk to me, I saw like that old, actor's mask that's half and half, right? And half of it was truth. What she was saying was truth. And the other half was humanism. And then I just had to go back and sit at my seat and say, okay, Lord, what part of that do you want me to own? And what part of it is lies? Because you can't tell with that spirit. It wants to lie and accuse you falsely. Yeah. And a lot of it that they do that is because they're insecure,
Exactly. And I think it's important too to recognize that, there's that spirit can discern, and even the Spirit of God. Many people have the Spirit of God in them still. There can be believers here that can have this, and certainly we see it working, but they can discern others who are hurt and wounded in that spirit of rejection. And they will, I think it's important to remember, they will seek that person out because to ostensibly mentor them, use the words like you be your spiritual mother, or because sometimes people, make idols. That's another thing we talk about. My idols are looking for a person to idolize. They may not think they do, but they really are. And Jezebel's spirit, or the spirits working, Jezebel working in a person's life, they will be drawn to that, and they will drawn to those peoples, and many times who are hurt and wounded, and so they can, move in and really take the place of doing a lot of the things that the Lord should be doing in their life.
And the last one I've kind of already mentioned, but they will unleash witchcraft prayers over you in the form of selfish motivation. Like they'll start praying their ideas over you. I had a client just last week tell me that in their church, they were brought up to the altar, and the pastor had a plan for this young girl to really, I guess, be married to one of the other young men in the church. And they just prayed that they would be married and bound their lives together and bound their souls together. And this really upset this young woman because she had no interest in this young man at all. They were just friends. But it was, there was something operating there that wanted that control. So we had to break any witchcraft prayers of selfish motivation that have been prayed over her.
And word curses, I guess.
Word
like
curses, and cancel the soul ties that was trying to, because the pastor actually prayed that their hearts would be knitted together. That's kind of scary.
And probably encourage them to find a new church.
Yeah, I would definitely.
No, seriously, if I was under that kind
she
of...
She did.
You would have to do that. I mean, we'll see. Sometimes, there's the remedy, there's not many remedies for some of these things. So that's, wow, yeah, that's pretty...
that was overt. It didn't take a whole lot for her to figure that one out.
No, exactly.
Yeah. So those are the warning signs. So it's we kind of danced around.
So those are things you can look at. See, is this operating? Are you under this? Or it's seeing this kind of at work. And so, and I think, many times it is one of those things. If you're in an environment or a church environment or someplace and you see this operating, it's like, it's sad to say, there's not a lot you can do many times, because especially if it's in leadership, you got many times I believe you should leave, you should run and not walk to the nearest exit.
Right.
And now if you're in a business environment, or sometimes you've got somebody, a supervisor or somebody, then you need to learn about boundaries or some things you can do in the natural to help protect yourself. But I think many times you see this in the church, in leadership especially. You need to leave, and if it's maybe it's not in the top leadership, then you can bring that to the church pastor leadership, and I have done that. I've been in an environment where I've done that. I've taken that, and many times sometimes it'll be a confirming word to that leader to say, wow, when you say it, it's like, yeah, I knew that, and sense it, and now they've got confirmation and they can do something. And so they sometimes, like I say, you get in the middle of something, people can't see the forest for the trees, because many times people operating influenced by that spirit have gifts. They have his abilities.
Oh, lots.
And they're plugged in, and they're active, and all the things a pastor or leader might look for. But, man, they can't see the damage that's being done. And sometimes somebody coming from the outside. So, yeah, I mean, I hate to say it, but, the person with that spirit needs, if they don't recognize it and they don't want to be free from it, then it's going to continue to do damage.
Yep.
And the answer, you might, I'll just stay and strike and fall. It's like, boy, you can do that, but I think more times than not, we've seen that's to your own peril, to your own detriment.
Well, that's that Revelation 2:20 scripture. Woe to you who allow that woman Jezebel, because you're going to allow it. What you allow is going to continue.
Exactly. And unless you're the pastor, and your leadership, you got to deal with it. If it's somebody else and the leadership won't receive it, you need to, you hit the door.
You got to, what's that Kenny Rogers song? You got to know when to hold them.
Know when to fold them.
Know when to walk away.
And know when to run. And that's not, it's not a sign of weakness. It's called discernment.
That's right.
So there's battles you can't fight. And, there's things we can do, but that's just our experience is if you're in the middle of that, under that, for your own benefit and sanity and walk with the Lord, you need to leave. Now, what if you're sitting there and wondering, well, gosh, am I under attack? How do I know? Am I being personally attack? What are some indicators that people might have?
Well, I mean, the first thing is that spirit of fear wants to just climb all over you. When I left that lunch after this special appointment with the woman who had to come and give me a word, I mean, I literally sat in my car and I shook. It causes you to have fear, because it's so persuasive, and it's saying things that typically aren't true. So mixed in with things that are, but it'll cause fear. I mean, I remember sitting in the car and thinking, okay, I've just gotten smeared by a spirit of witchcraft and control and manipulation, I didn't want to say the woman was, but I did know the spirits that were in operation there. And before I could even move on, one of my intercessors called me and said, what are you going through right now? I'm sensing that you've got some fear all over you and we need to pray. And it was like great timing because I had to break that assignment really quickly with that because, there's enough truth in there where your mind just starts thinking about it and then you get fearful. Well, what if that is me? And what if I am, and so it kind of manipulates you in that way.
And it might be just in general, just to fine tune a little bit. I mean, fear is a general thing. A lot of people say, well, I'm in fear, but many times it can be associated with a person. I think that leader, if you're in fear, right around that person and you're afraid of them, then and what they're going to do, that to me is a real strong indicator.
Good. Yeah.
One. So what's another one?
You start to hide or isolate, pull away and retreat. So you're, like Elijah in the cave. You're just separating and hiding because, you don't really want to confront that thing. And so you back down. Yeah.
Pull away from people.
Yep. Right.
And we've seen fatigue work many times. People, that spirit will wear you out. If you're in an environment, you can be it will exhaust you mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And spiritual exhaustion is not something we're called to walk in. We're supposed to have peace and contentment. So just unreasonable exhaustion in your church environment or your ministry environment or your business environment, that's another indicator. Yeah,
because you just feel like you're spinning, like you're not making any headway with that thing around, so it just wears you out. And it oftentimes it brings in over you a hyperactive spirit, where you lay down at night and man, you can't even turn your brain off. And then that spirit of unrest comes to just keep you up thinking, like you're trying to sort through it, but it's so foggy, you can't get it. And that's how it brings in that exhaustion. Sometimes it'll cause your dreams to become perverse, sexually perverse, oftentimes too. If that person's walking with a spirit of perversion, you may pick up on that. If they've been sexually abused or they're trying to seduce you, and that's the look of that seduction from a perverse standpoint, it may cause you to have some sexual thoughts about that person, and then your thoughts and dreams will turn that way too. So, and also, this is something that I haven't really recognized too much, but a lot of prolonged illnesses start to hinder you, or, the unusual things start to happen to you, like accidents or different things like that. It could be because that either you're a threat and they want you out of the way. I mean, I recognized that one year I was dating a young man, and he was dating someone else who was operating with some witchcraft, and she put spells on him. She ended up marrying her, but I was dating him at that time. And what happened to me was I started getting sick. I started getting into car accidents. I started having all these things start to happen to me. I didn't recognize it as being associated with that spirit of Jezebel that was sitting over that relationship. But yeah, it had its effect on me. So then freak accidents, like becoming commonplace, are part of it. So a lot of that. All
right. Those are some signs or things you can look at if and once again, they're not proofs, they're more evidences and indicators. There could be a lot of things going on, but I think these are some things you can look at to consider that maybe you are under attack from that Jezebel spirit. And if this speaks to you and you think you might have that operating in your life, then and you're open to that. And many times it's you try to bring that truth to people, when pastors will try to bring it to somebody else, and many times they don't receive it. They'll respond, well, no, that's not true, or you're the one controlling me, and it's hard to get to that place of brokenness. But if you think this might be you and you're open, then gosh, you get some deliverance. You need some deliverance, right?
Yeah. Or if you're underneath the effect of one that has been operating this way over you, then you need to get deliverance to come out from underneath its submission.
Exactly. There's probably things that have come upon you. That's one of the open doors. People who've had ungodly control over you can cause spirits to enter you. But as we've touched on already, if you're in that don't stay. I mean, gosh, if it's in the leadership there, it will, you can't fight that thing. And, you just, our typical best counsel for people is, if you're in that environment, is you just need to leave. And yes, there's no such thing as a perfect church. I get that. But there's a lot of good churches, and you might have individuals in a church struggling with that. But if it's over the leadership, boy, it's just because the goal is death and destruction. And
right.
I think that's the thing to do. That's the, it's designed to bring death and destruction on the church. So any final thoughts?
Well, always, now that we've brought this up to your attention, I just want you to be careful. Never call the person a Jezebel. You need to forgive them because they're operating under some spiritual dimension, just like, a lot of people are. Forgive them. You're going to break that soul tie with them. And if you haven't learned how to do that, listen to one of our other podcasts. Drop the judgment. Don't judge them based on the spirits that are operating through them. Don't speak out these things out loud, because oftentimes once you start to judge, you'll be judged with this. And then, recognize that you're dealing with spirits. As Don talked about, this is not, like Ephesians 6:12 says, you're dealing with spirits. You're not dealing with the flesh and the blood. So, if you've been underneath this attack, and you feel like you've got some fallout from it, or it's really hurt your intimacy with the Lord or caused problems, then come in for deliverance, and we'll pull out its tentacles and set you free.
Well, and I would add to that, just to counter the other side of it. We've talked a lot about the spirit of Jezebel and spirits. We're always wanting to say there's not demons behind every problem in a person's life. And some people have certain temperaments where they just tend to be more of a controlling temperament. We call them a choleric temperament. And that, and so there's not demons everywhere. You need that discernment. What is it? What's in the flesh? And then I say, if you're under this, the responsibility to do something lies with you.
Right.
Not fret and fume about the other person.
Yeah, exactly.
You need to do things in your own life. You can't fix them, but the key is discernment.
Right.
And when you have some discernment, then you can begin to do something about it. We hope you've enjoyed this podcast. Would love to hear from you. You can email us with suggestions on future podcasts. We're always looking for good topics. We want to talk about things that are relevant to you. These podcasts are on our website, our A&BCounseling.com website. Of course, we do counseling and deliverance. We do it over the internet. We do it in our offices here. The podcasts, like I say, are hosted there as well. We're on iTunes, deliveranceministry.fm. If you look for us there, we certainly would relish you leaving a review for us there. We'd very much appreciate that. On our both of our websites, you can sign up for our resource library. We have a lot of materials, a lot of free stuff, really. Podcasts like this, articles, slide shares, videos. We have a big presence on YouTube. Totally free sign up for that. Of course, we've got our resources there as well that you can purchase: deliverance ministry training, children's deliverance ministry training, primer videos on spiritual warfare and whatnot. We've also got really offering now some of our resources in Spanish. We have that as well. Have our Warrior Partners page where you can become a regular giver to the ministry, help us expand the ministry of deliverance. And so there's a lot there. We encourage you to visit our websites for that and see that we have. And once again, we very much hope you enjoyed this podcast, the second of 2 parts, and stay tuned. Be back with us next time when we'll have another topic dealing with spiritual warfare and deliverance. God bless you.